Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan the Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Alright, today's video, I want to talk about where mechanics work. It's an odd question that most people never think about, so let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Alright, if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Take a look around, watch some of the other videos. I have a lot of videos. You should be able to find something you like. I've got trip reports, breakdown videos, and just how stuff works. Some of which, a lot of topics, most people never knew they wanted to know that, but I have a video for that. Alright, today's topic, where ride mechanics work. Kind of an odd thing. It's like, well, where's this coming from? Well, a lot of people go to big major theme parks and they always just assume that mechanics have this really nice place to go inspect the equipment and do everything they need to do on the roller coasters before they take them out. So I want to just kind of touch today and say, yes, that's true, or no, that's not true. It's kind of a mixed bag, actually. So where I wanted to start off with is actually flat rides. Flat rides are all over the park. Of course, amusement parks aren't made up of strictly 100% roller coasters. There's a lot of flat rides all over the place. So where do mechanics work on those flat rides? Well, the majority of work on flat rides takes place in the station, in the loading position, exactly where the ride sits. When you get on the ride, that's where all the work takes place of the ride. There's a lot of mechanics that have to go around and you have to sit down in seats and take covers off, remove seat backs, and do things like that simply just to see the areas you're looking at on those things. Then mechanics typically have to crawl underneath rides around in areas in the really deep, dark places around and then climb up high to look at pivot structures and things like that. So there is no service point for these rides. It's just kind of all out in the open, in direct sunlight. Remember, when you've got heat waves and stuff going on or really cold temperatures, the mechanics every day have to work in that environment on pretty much all the rides out there. So some slack is needed sometimes for extreme weather. Remember that. All right, so moving along, let's move into why we're all here, right? Let's talk about roller coasters. Where do mechanics work on roller coasters? Well, it's actually the same answer. A lot of roller coasters out there, and I mean a lot of them, do not have dedicated work bays for the rides. Now, one thing that's really interesting is that people confuse a service track with a work bay all the time. Okay, a service track, what is its purpose? The service track is meant to store trains while they're not being used. So, for example, there are rides out there, think about mainly like some Morgan coasters, some old aerodynamic coasters and stuff like that. You look out next to the brake run and you'll see another track sitting next to that brake run. That is a service track. The service track is simply meant to store the train once it's done and it's ready for service. Just sits there. A lot of rides, operations is expected to come and actually pull the trains out and put them onto the track to run them for the day. Not every park that's a maintenance deal. A lot of parks that is operations deal, and they let them do that, which is perfectly fine. But that service track is not necessarily a maintenance workplace. So, on a lot of older roller coasters, the mechanics literally just work on that train in the station. Now, a lot of it's a 50-50 for those things that have service tracks out there. I know I worked on an SLC. It had a service track off to the side. It took 2 people to pull a train out of that service track. It took 2 people to put the train away into that service track. Honestly, it was about another 20 minutes added on to the inspection, going in and coming out. So realistically, the stuff that we needed to do, it actually slowed down the inspection when I worked on it in the station. And it slowed that inspection down by having it in the station, but it was only by about 5, maybe 10 minutes. That was it. So realistically, if I didn't put the train away in the service area and I just serviced it in the station where the train normally sits, I'd actually come out, well, from time elapsed start to finish, I'd actually come out about 25 minutes ahead So it'd be a 25-minute faster inspection. Now, one of the problems with working in service areas is that sometimes it's the service area. That's where the train is meant to sit and be stored. What makes that place so special? Well, a lot of the time that area is just void of all the other components needed to run the ride. For example, we'll use the SLC, but this applies to many things. In the station, you have brakes, booster wheels, release mechanisms, proximity sensors sitting around. All that stuff you have to work around when you're servicing a train inside the station. But this is something that most people do. Most people do service the trains inside the station. So in the service area, you still have a brake or a booster wheel or something holding that train, but it's only in one spot. There's no other brakes or boosters in those spots, and there's no proximity sensors around them, typically. So the service area is more appetizing, but a lot of parks don't make the proper necessities to actually work on it out there. There's no cover, there's no lights, there's no nothing else. So have you ever worked on the train in the dark? It's not great. You can wear a headlight and see stuff, but it is really not great. So working on stuff in the dark, I'd rather have it in the station. There's plenty of light in the station because that's where you're trying to light people getting on and off the train already. It's like, do it there. It's a lot easier. So there is a large, very large number of roller coasters out there that don't even have service tracks to them. They're meant to stay just in the station and be serviced there. Guaranteed every time. Shuttle coasters. Shuttle coasters where there's only one train on the track and it goes back and forth, right? Those do not have service bays or service stations to them because there's only one train on the track. The station where it sits is where it's always going to be. There's no second train to service. There's nothing to take on and take off. That's it. Shuttle coasters are always serviced on the track. Does that get in the way of doing things? Yeah, it does. You have to work around unlock release bars. You have to work around brakes, booster motors, proximity sensors. Yeah. What's the one thing that most people don't think of? Checking road wheels. How do you check the road wheels on a train that's on the track? Well, you have to do something like you have to lift it up. So you need a second person, or if you're a big person like myself, with big long arms, you can use a J-bar or pickle bar, dig bar, whatever you want to call it. It's a very long steel bar, and stick it in underneath the wheel carrier and push down on it to check the road wheels. It basically jacks one side of the train up. Let's see, I worked on an impulse coaster that did not have a service track to it because it was a shuttle coaster. T438 U-shaped coaster. Anyways, it didn't have a service track on it or anything else, and all of its wheels were crushed against the track. So checking wheels on those was really hard to do. And on the top of the train, there was induction motors all on the top. You could not see the top of the train. So that was a tremendous pain in the butt because in order to check the hardware in the reaction fin areas, you had to actually turn the ride on and move the train until it sat in this one little tiny spot that was only about 2 meters wide to let the train pass through in that area so you can actually see the hardware on top. Not great. Hey, as a mechanic, you got to do what you got to do to get the ride up and running, right? So then we move out of that spectrum and we say, well, we know plenty of rides out there that have service bays and work bays. Is there a difference between those two? For all intents and purposes, no, there's not a difference between it. If you really want to split hairs on a lot of B&M attractions especially, you have, this will get most people, you have 2 service bays and a work bay. I know a lot of people even that were working on B&Ms are like, what? 3 trains, right? You have 2 service bays and a work bay. How does that work? Okay, I mean, this is really splitting hairs, right? So on a lot of B&M rides that have 3 trains, some of them that have 2, if you look at the interior and look up ahead, overhead of the train, on a lot of bays out there that have the 3 trains or 2, just depending on how the ride is configured, you will see one where there's just a train can sit there, another one where the train can sit there, and then a third one that's got a very tall I-beam overhead. Big I-beam that goes way out towards the back of the ride, or it might go out towards the front, again, depending on your configuration. So, what's interesting about that is that I-beam is meant to have a hoist on it. The hoist is meant to pick up the coach in that bay to be able to take it off and set it down on the ground, or to pick one up from the ground behind it and put it into the bay. So what's that for? That's for when you take a train off to refurbish it, or when you're done refurbishing it and you go to put it back on. Service bays, work bays, they're kind of the same exact thing, but on those B&Ms, it's kind of funny because it's like 1 and 2. The ones that don't have the I-beam are true service bays. They're just meant to take the train in. They get the rails out of the way, so everything is hanging there on the B&M rides. Actually, a lot of rides. I've seen them on the Mach rides. I've seen them on Intamin rides. They actually sit out at the edge of the coaches. The whole train is kind of like sliding on the edge of the coach outside there. That way the wheel carriers can just hang down and the mechanics can work on everything. And then in the far one, that other one, which would be a service bay, technically still is a service bay. That's the official work bay because that's the one that you can actually put the train together and take it apart and take it off there from. That is really splitting hairs, though. For all intents and purposes, yeah, when you look back out there, when you have train storage, it's like you have 3 or 2. You could just always use them interchangeably. It's 3 work bays, 3 service bays. No one cares at all. It's just me going off on tangents. I know, it's a fun story. So yeah, but depending on your environment and how much the company spent on the installation will determine that work bay or that service bay. That really determines that. So I've watched plenty of installations where they put a nice multi-train service bay out there, and it's got a nice transfer track that slides over in front of it. Everything is good to go, and it's simply just a metal frame sitting out there. There's nothing else, just a metal frame. It's like, oh, no shelter from rain? No. No shelter from snow? It's like, well, we take the trains off during the time of year it'd be snowing. It's like, okay. Still no shelter from the sun out there? It's like, no, they just have to deal with that. So where do the mechanics store all the greases and lubrications that can't get snow and rain, basically water, on them or they'll get destroyed? Where is that stuff kept? Well, we have a separate place to store all the greases. It's like, well, that seems counterproductive, don't you think? It's like, okay, so the next step up. I was in the next step up. We had a service bay with the big metal frame around it, and then they put a tarp, a tent over the top of it, essentially. It was nice, it looked nice, but it was essentially a tent out there. It's like, okay, that was one step up. We had lights where we needed them. It was nice and lit up at nighttime. Upper and the lower bay was nice. You could work on the top and the bottom of the train. All right. And when it rained, a lot of it kept the water off. The sides weren't covered at all, so still wasn't great. When it was hot as frizzle frack outside, it was hot as frizzle frack working on the train. Absolutely. When it was cold working on the train. Is that a great environment to assemble stuff and take stuff apart? No, it's not. Is that what you have to deal with? Yes, that's what you have to deal with. You're just going to deal with that. Then I've seen some really nice installations where that work bay, those service bays, were completely covered and they actually put a building around it. They actually gave the building heating and air conditioning. That is a true service work bay area right there. That is a true area because you can go in there when it's blistering hot or super cold and still get the job done. It could be raining cats and dogs outside. It won't really affect you at all. You can just go work on the thing. Now, does that mean that mechanics are only working in those service bays on those trains? No, actually it doesn't. Even with the service bay at my disposal, I actually only did half my inspection inside the service bay. The floorless coaster that I worked on, I would always go up there and do the bottom side of the train in the work base, so service base, whichever one you want to call it. Right, so I would do the bottom side of the train. I'd go down, I'd check all the wheels because there's no track. Cool. I would go down and check all the wheels. I'd check all the hitches, the chain dogs, the anti-rollbacks, all the FRP fiberglass, all those components, the bottom sides, the Roth bearings, all that stuff. I'd check the complete bottom side of the train. Then when it came to the top side of the train, what would I do? Well, I would take that and I would just move the transfer track over and pull those trains out and then put them into the station. Why'd you put them into the station? It's like, well, it was a floorless coaster, right? So when you work on the top side of a train, you have these things up there that is quite hazardous. We like to call them holes. On the top side of a train, between the coaches, you have a big hole where you could fall to the lower level. That's not great. So they give you work platforms to put up there and set down to where you can actually walk in those areas now. Those take a while to set up. They take a while to move. So it doesn't make for the quickest inspection. But if I take the train out and put it in the station, as soon as I move those combs up, floorless coaster, right? As soon as I move the combs up, it forms the floor throughout the entire thing. It's all at one level. It's lit. I can see. Everything is there. Hey, do I need the restraints unlocked? No problem. Go over, press the button, unlock the restraints. Easy. Lock them back. Go check the entire train at one time. You know what? Even if you did the service in the service bay over there, you still have to pull it out and use the ride to open and close the restraints. I mean, you could do it manually in the service bay just to see, but you still need to make sure that the ride can unlock and lock all the restraints properly. You're doing the same thing anyway. So it's kind of like a cost-saving thing. Now, where that is kind of, you can't get around that situation is inverted vehicles. Inverted trains, you pretty much have to go up on top because where I was on the bottom of the train looking at all the wheels and everything else, well, that is the same, it's true, for the top of the train. No rails and everything like that, so you really need to get up there and inspect everything. So for those bays, now I believe when they started putting those in, fall protection wasn't really an issue. It was kind of one of those common sense things. Hey, this is where you need to work. See that big hole? Don't fall in it. And everyone just went, okay. No one fell in it. But as things progressed, as lawsuits and stuff happened, it's like, okay, now you need to be, when you're up on top of the train, you got to be wearing a climbing harness. You got to have 2 points hooked off to an overhead suspension so you can actually work on the train safely. You got to have, your helmet and gloves and safety glasses, lockout, tag out, orange vest, let people know you're there. The whole 9 yards. You got to have everything up there to work on the top of one of the inverted trains. The only time you kind of get around that, it's if you don't want to go with all the fall protection stuff, but you still need to service the top of the train. You can still service the top of the train from the bottom. It's not the best, but honestly, those things, you can just take a 6-foot ladder and set it up in between the coaches. Climb up. You're only up about 3 or 4 rungs. That's it. You're not even halfway up that ladder as you're up on top of there, and then you could still check the top of the train. This is the same exact thing I did on the SLC. I just used a ladder next to the train, climbed up about 3 rungs, and got to the entire top of the train where I needed it. So the inspection involved the ladder. Used it every time. It wasn't a big deal. But then these invert coasters, those are the ones where it's a little more cumbersome to work on those trains, almost no matter where you go. Okay, while we're talking about this, a lot of times when you're working on roller coasters, you need parts and pieces. So some roller coasters actually have the parts and pieces stored at the ride. But a lot of these pieces are bigger components that are typically not inventoried. So small components, high consumption items, foam, things like that, are stored in a centralized warehouse where the mechanic has to go and sign those components out to be used. Other ones, things that might require NDT and such like that, are a lot of times stored out at the ride where the mechanic can just grab them as needed. This might include built up and ready to go wheels sitting on there, or maybe the nylon insert for the wheel. That happens a lot. They're just stored out at the ride. They're assigned out of inventory and then just placed out at the ride for usage as they need. That way the mechanics don't have to waste time going back to the inventory warehouse to sign stuff out and bring it back over. It hurts a little bit in the cost area because the park doesn't know exactly what day all those components they were used. If I go in and sign out 10 nylon rings to just store at the ride, then the park, the maintenance manager, they're suddenly saying, hey, why did you guys suddenly use 10 wheels? And the maintenance manager was like, huh? What? It's like, yeah, you signed out basically $13,000 worth of nylon on one day, and then they start making phone calls. What did we do this? Where did this? Who signed this out? Why did we sign this out? So that's a little harder to do. But then some of the weird stuff is like axles. Sometimes you'll keep an axle down at the ride. It's kind of a slippery slope there because it has NDT attached to it. So if I pull an axle out of the ride, like a B&M axle, they're only about this big and about that big in diameter. But if I pull an axle out at the ride, that axle actually has NDT attached with it. I took this axle once a year and I sent it out for inspection and said it's good. So that actually has paperwork behind it. So if I just say, oh, you know what, I took it out, and when I took it out, I dropped it on the ground and it's all scarred up now, and I'm just going to replace it with this other axle that I had on the shelf sitting here, there is a document trail you have to form to show that you pulled that one out and put the new one in its place. This isn't quite as bad as like an aircraft industry or something, because a lot of those like axles and things like that, they're not serialized at all. They're just a component. So you just have to document that it was train 2 load side wheel carrier front road wheel replaced the axle because I dropped the other one. Mechanics won't like writing down something like they accidentally damaged the axle when they took the thing apart and replaced it. But your local person who reviews your documentation will love that, because then there was a simple thing. Oh, look, you dropped it. It's like, oh, they've got documentation now of the old one going out and the new one coming in, and it is double thumbs up all the way around. Weird tangent, sorry. Document your stuff. But yeah, it's an odd mixture of what parts and pieces are kept at the ride versus in an inventory lockup, and that's the same with high consumables like grease and things like that. They typically don't want too much being stored out at the ride, but they want some there to prevent all this back and forth from mechanics walking around all day. So it all adds to part of the work experience when you deal with rides. Okay, so moving away from the roller coasters, and you say, well, most every park has a maintenance shop. What is the maintenance shop for? That's really housing most of the maintenance mechanics tools and things like that. Do the mechanics store their tools out at the ride? It depends on the park. Some parks have satellite storage areas for tools. Some parks actually keep tools for the rides at the ride. So the mechanic actually just has to go there and all the tools that they need are there. Those parks are few and far between. The majority of the parks, the mechanic has to supply their own tools to work on the ride. They have to bring their own sockets, their own wrenches, everything else, and they carry that around with them. So back at the maintenance shop is where they keep their big toolbox with all of their tools. Now, if there's probably plenty of like auto mechanics watching where you've got one of those toolboxes that's 6 feet high and 12 feet long. Not quite the case for ride mechanics. Ride mechanics tools are typically much more compact because we need to travel with our tools all the time. We need to take that stuff, so we don't have the full assortment of wrenches in there. If we know the equipment we're always working on, we know we're just grabbing those key things because there's nothing else in between. 16 millimeter wrench. It's like there is no 16 millimeter bolt on this entire equipment. There's nothing there, so we don't take it. Some of the parks that have a lot of budget will put tools at the rides to where the mechanics just can go there and they do what they need to do. Even the big budget parks still have problems with those tools growing legs and walking away. They might not have a problem with employees stealing the tools. That might not be an issue, but the tool doesn't have to be stolen to be gone. It never fails. One of the inspectors I talked with, he was one of the high-ups for maintenance at Disneyland. And he said he went to these ride calls all the time and would ask the mechanics for just a regular voltmeter. And the mechanics wouldn't have a voltmeter, and they'd be somewhere up like in one of like zone 8 block break, basically inside a Space Mountain, right? They're way up inside there, nowhere close to anything. So it's like, okay, go get a voltmeter. So they got tired of doing that. So they bought a whole bunch of lock boxes and a whole bunch of voltmeters and stuck them at all the rides. So, and they put a supervisor key on it. So the supervisors would have access to that voltmeter if they needed it. And they were very proud of themselves. And he said then the next time it broke down, they went out there and he says, give me a voltmeter. And the mechanic again was like, I don't have a voltmeter on me. Just not uncommon for mechanics. Most mechanics don't carry voltmeters with them because they're not electrical guys. So it's like, okay, no problem. So he took out his special supervisor key, went over to the box, unlocked it, and the voltmeter was gone. Wah, 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 wah. Even big parks have big problems like that. So mechanics typically carry their own stuff around. So at the ride is typically custom tools. These are things needed to take trains apart and put trains back together. Wrench assortments and stuff like that? No, not like that. But if there is something to take a particular assembly apart, you know, it's like you need a 42 millimeter wrench and socket, and it's like, wow, that's big. Most mechanics don't have that. So that would be a tools that are set at the ride. And in a typically like a rolling box out there somewhere, they have some tools inside there to do those custom special jobs, hydraulic pullers, things like that to remove booster wheels and brake components out on the track. So we'll move away from the ride and we'll go to the maintenance shop again, and we'll say, what is the shop for? The shop is for bigger component servicing. When they take the train off of the roller coaster, it goes back to the shop to get torn down into individual components to be inspected, NDT'd, put back together, that sort of stuff. Why the shop? Well, you can do the inspection, tear down, everything like that out at the ride. You can do that out there. If you have enough space, tear it all down and do it out there. The shop is more to keep your personnel levels up around the park, right? So where we were, I could tear a train down completely out in one of the work bays out there at my floorless coaster. Tear it all down, NDT it, everything. Is it easy to maneuver? No. Is all the space gone? Yes. Can it be done? Yes. Do I like to do that? No. It's like, why? Because if I want, the park comes up and running. Now I'm taking my morning crew that was working in the park, and I'm like, hey, go out to this ride and continue refurbishment on it. It's like, okay, cool. I took 5 guys and threw them out there and said, you guys work on that train. All right. Now I still have a park to run. And if I need people to run ride calls, I don't want to dispatch them from a ride that might be on the corner of nowhere. You know, it might be at the very furthest edge of the park that's completely useless to everything else. And then every time a ride breaks down, I got to send, a mechanic all the way across the park? No. So typically you like to keep maintenance people centralized to one particular area. That way it's like, okay, we stay in the center and then dispatch from there. Or there might be a remote shop somewhere. You guys stay in the remote shop over there and do your work on that train, whatever it might be. Stay over there. That way you guys can cover that part of the park. We'll cover this part of the park. Cool. What else happens in the maintenance shop? Well, when other rides break down, like those flat rides, and they need to service that, those parts and pieces also have to get taken somewhere. So if I was going to remove a gearbox because there's something wrong with it out of a Himalaya or something like that, I am not going to pull that gearbox out and then set it right next to the Himalaya and try to service it right there. There's no lights, there's no press, there's no machine shop, there's no nothing out there. I can't work on that. All I could do essentially would be to drain the oil next to the ride. Like, I could do that out there. So I want to bring that back to the shop where I have access to the bigger equipment in the maintenance shop. Typically, a maintenance shop is a series of smaller shops put together. Like a lot of maintenance shops, you have the mechanical shop, you'll have an electrician shop, you'll have the paint in some parks, you'll have a sign shop around that area, a wood shop around that area, a weld shop around that area. You have everything you need to get stuff done. And then bigger tools like hydraulic presses, like I mentioned. Like, can't tell you how helpful hydraulic presses are when you service big equipment. So that stuff is in the maintenance area. Now, it might not be convenient because the maintenance area might be on the corner of the park. A lot of them are. And the ride you're trying to refurbish is in the center of the park. And then in case it would make sense to say, hey, let's tear down that ride out there in the center of the park. That way we can keep people centralized to all the other rides. You ever been at a ride and it breaks down and they say maintenance is on their way and it seems like it's 5 minutes before they show up? They're probably in the middle of something on the other side of the park and they had to stop what they were doing, clean up enough to make themselves presentable, and then possibly, like where I was, we had to then walk through the park to the other side of the park. That could take a long time to do.
That isn't very reassuring.
Last thing is just keeping kind of like space storage and all this stuff. A lot of these things is not really part of the issue, but I just wanted to bring it up. A lot of this stuff, you need special devices, a special lifting platform, tool, carriage, schmavis, whatever you want to call it. You need something special to keep that vehicle part that you just took off in an area where you can service it. Most of the time you need a crane to get like a roller coaster component off the track, and then once you set it down, you can't just pick it up with a forklift and take it away. You'll probably actually bend the steel depending on how you pick it up. So you actually need a special device that the roller coaster sits on top of so you can pick that up with the forklift and take it around. Also, when you take it into like the maintenance shop, you need then another forklift or pallet jack to be able to pick that up to move it around. So a lot of space in the maintenance areas is also taken up by special fixtures for rides and other components to sit on. Some of them can be quite big. I know the fixtures we use for the floorless train, they took up a good space. They took up as probably 10 feet wide and about 40 feet long worth of space. So don't be surprised a lot of times when you see something in infields, because a lot of these things get stored in or very close to the infield of the ride. You see these big metal looking devices sitting there. Those are probably used for your train refurbishments. Okay, let me know your thoughts. What do you think? Do you work on trains in service bays? Do you work on trains out at the ride? I know I have a lot of mechanics that watch this channel, so it's one of those things. It's like, where do you prefer to service it? I know my key requirement is where light is, because most of the time it's the morning or it's the nighttime. Either way, the sun is down. And you need light to work on stuff. So I'm pretty much in this, I'll work around whatever. As long as I have light to do it, I'm fine with that. Okay, like, comment, share, subscribe if you want to. Go for it. If you want to comment downstairs, great, do that. If you want to send me an email, you can always email me at ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com. And stay off the air gates. Bye.